Good day, everyone. It is the great game. And Matthew Arrett is here. He is the one and only geostrategic, geoeconomic, geopolitical maven himself. You can find him over at CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, as well as the RisingTideFoundation.net. And if you haven't done so already, you better buy his books in order to understand where the heck we are in this world, in this grand struggle of what we're facing today. And also go to his what is they call it? Not Patreon. It's Substack. That's what it is. Substack. Go to Substack and become a subscriber. It is well worth it. And with that being said, Matthew, what's up, buddy? How are you? How's the move going? How's everything else?
The move went smoothly. With this house is slowly becoming a home, so that's good. And we're doing our part here to preserve the neoliberal order by cutting back. Been skipping a few meals, doing our part as patriots to do what we got to do to keep the new world order afloat.
Yeah, I'm doing my part as well. I've reduced my carbon footprint. I'm all about sustainability, and
I'm trying to breathe shallower breaths every day.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to do that as well, and I'm trying to control as much methane as I release on a given day. I'm trying to control that. Siege, what are you doing to reduce your carbon footprint, Siege?
I really transforming my entire diet to veggies. That's it. Just veggies only, giving up the beef.
There's a lot of veggies can be very gassy though. You got to use an eco-friendly
how does that help you, man?
The methane in. I mean,
well, I'm bottling my own gas.
Oh, okay. Smart. You could use it as fuel.
Right.
I get it.
Right. There might be some alternative to candle wax or something you could burn the fuel with.
See, that's one of the best ideas. In spite of all your toxic masculinity, that's one of the best things I've heard from you, Siege.
But it's crazy, right? Like, I think people know that we're referring to Brian Deese, this economic advisor for the White House, who came out basically saying this is a former BlackRock guy, Princeton, ivory tower, silver spoon in his mouth, probably drives a Tesla, telling Americans that in order to preserve the liberal world order, literally that's his words, we have to stand firm and just suck it up and pay higher gas indefinitely. And
I'm ready for $17 a gallon gasoline. I will do my part to fight Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, people will do a lot if you give us a reason. If our reason is satisfied, we will sacrifice immensely to do something which we are persuaded is actually necessary and good. But the liberal order, the rules-based international liberal order, it's so vapid and so obviously misanthropic and doesn't care about anybody. They actually expect people still to jump through hoops of fire to satisfy this cause, which is really just the cause of the oligarchs, right? Just the right to rape and pillage as much as they see fit, unless you're not one of them, in which case you get to basically be disposable and be flushed. And they actually expect people to go along with that. Yeah. And it's the delusional level factor is very, very high.
Absolutely.
There's the White House as well. Like, I forgot the woman's name who replaced the twit. But the White House basically also said,
Jean-Pierre. I think her name is Jean-Pierre Le Fleury or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that.
But that, if you think your life is getting bad, or you're not paying your bills, or you're thinking about suicide or whatever else, don't. It's really you're wrong. You're wrong, because we're statistical, peer-reviewed economists have demonstrated that we are experiencing the most robust economic boom in American history. Not even like the last 30 or 40 years. She went full-blown, quadrupled down, and actually said all American history has never seen as much of a boom of economic prosperity as right now.
Right now. The boom is... you see, do you feel the boom? I'm feeling the boom when I go to the gas pump. I'm feeling the boom when I go grocery shopping. I'm feeling the boom when it comes to not being able to get anything that I need because there's a supply chain is completely broken. I'm feeling all kinds of booms, man. I don't know about you, Matthew. I think you're just a little too negative. I think you're you're a bit cynical about the booming. There's a lot of boom coming out of the West.
There's a lot of boom. There's going to be a Titanic boom, like an iceberg at the hull of the Titanic boom is already striking the West. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's been a very stark contrast. The last week, especially week and a half, where we had all of these summits representing the two opposing paradigms. On the one hand, we had the NATO summit in Madrid. That was absurd, which also involved other non-NATO members in from the Pacific for the first time in history, from Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, all being brought in to take part in this basically ritualistic sort of mass commitment to self-sacrifice for the sake of this liberal order. It's not just your average Joe, blue-collar Joe who's expected to die. It's whole nation states. Australia itself is suffering from one of the biggest acute energy crises. It's winter there right now. One of their biggest and most important strategic dams has burst, over flooded. They've got winter floods going on. A massive coal, which they're super reliant on, has tripled in price. There's a demand being made by the federal government to all regions, all states of Australia, to basically conserve your energy use. That includes hospitals. So you have all of this happening on top of the food crisis, and their new prime minister is not allowed to just go and just be there on the ground. He was still forced to go and visit Zelensky, to go to NATO, to the summit, and solidify or reconsolidate their idea of creating this stupid NATO of the Pacific Quad.
Look, man, you said the wrong name. He's no longer known as Zelensky. He removed the Z from his name. He's just known as Zelensky.
Zelensky,
yes. No Z.
Yeah.
Can't use Z.
No, right.
Ukraine has officially.
That is illegal.
It's illegal. They've removed the letter Z from all the keyboards of all the computers and laptops in Ukraine as well. So I just want to let you know that.
Right. And it's ironic too, right? Germany as well has banned the use of Z.
This is the retarded West we're living in, man. I'm embarrassed.
The lack of any awareness or self-criticism of what was done here in Germany and in Ukraine in the 1940s, 30s, 40s. I mean, they were burning books back then. What are they doing now? They're burning books. 100,000 books have been not only blacklisted, but targeted for extraction from all of the libraries, the schools of Ukraine, and burned by their official government. Germany has actually started banning entire letters of the alphabet. Journalists who are now covering, who are providing an alternative piece of coverage of the developments in Ukraine, who are not toting the company line of the rules-based order, have now new laws that they have to contend with, where you can now throw journalists in jail in Germany for up to 3 years for questioning the official narratives, basically, asserting that you must be a misinformation operative from Russia, deployed to undermine the rules-based international order of the West. And it's what is this rules-based international order? What is this the liberal worldview? What is liberalism? People get very confused about what this actually is, but on the surface, it seems fine. Liberal, liberty, common root words. I like being, would you rather be a tyrant? No, I'd rather be liberal, I suppose. It's okay, well, what does that mean? Well, when you actually get down to it, philosophical liberalism is just a cover for empire, and it always has been just that. It's we'll agree that it's this refraining from any judgment of any principle of value that is objectively true, and basically the liberal would say all opinions must be held to be equally possibly true, and the only set of opinions that become dominant are those that are wielded by those who have the political power to impose or threaten or intimidate the weaker to accept their definitions, their narratives of what opinions should be the alpha opinions. But it's a very Darwinian idea, or a Hobbesian Darwinian, because they're pretty much two sides of the same thing idea. But the concept of real objective truth existing is not even permitted within a liberal worldview. That's why you can have as many types of models of string theory, as many types of models of gender theory that you could possibly imagine. and then just come up with some semblance of a logical argument justifying them. And just by having an apparently academically approved format to justify your theory of 52 genders or 72 genders or 1,892 genders or 11 or 13 dimensions for your string theory model or another, it doesn't matter. It's just, is it persuasive? If it's not persuasive, is it something you can threaten or pump money into to get people to go along with, or not? And if it doesn't have that type of clout, it doesn't matter if it's more true or not objectively. It will be ignored. It will be shut down, or its proponents will be attacked, ridiculed, put in jail, or killed if they refuse to renounce their non-liberal worldviews. And that's all the liberal worldview is. That's what the liberal order has been entirely based upon. And it's always been a cover. Like, we're going to have liberal economic policies, right? Adam Smith. So the British Empire has always said, okay, we're liberal. We're going to encourage global free trade for all of the countries we do business with. And it's like, yeah, okay, but did you, Britain, ever apply that to yourself? How did you develop the monopoly in the 19th century for manufacturing? Oh, you used protectionism. Oh, but yet those British grand strategists, Lord Palmerston, Lord Shelburne, all of these British grand strategists of the 19th century and into the 20th century under globalization have always promoted it for their victims to say, oh, you don't want to infringe upon the freedom of the marketplace, do you? With your nation states and national regulation? No, you want everybody to have the freedom to compete, don't you? And okay, well, then get rid of protectionism, get rid of regulation, and let everybody be free. And it sounds all nice and good until you realize that the people promoting that themselves don't believe their own they don't believe their theories. They just want you to lay down your sentinel so that they can go in and rob you, which is what the invisible hand was always all about.
Yeah.
And that's what globalization is. That's why nobody's allowed to have full spectrum economies. Under the last 50 years of globalization, the rule is you do what can make you maximize money for you as a nation. And if you have a lot of land, you don't need to have industry. You just bake land. If you happen to have factories for running shoes and cheap crap for Dollaramas, that's what you do. You do cash cropping. And then nobody has a full spectrum ability to supply their own needs. So everybody is then dependent on a middleman who controls the levers of production, motion of goods, transformation of raw materials into something useful, and consumption patterns. And it's always those transnational middlemen in between that can manipulate the system as a system. And all of the so-called nation states increasingly become colonized and tools or instruments for that banking elite. So you can have nation states that are allowed to do things to intervene, like we see in the case of the USA right now, or for the past it's not like the USA as a government or Europe as governments have not been allowed to play a role in the economy. It's just that the only role that they've been permitted to play, because they're colonized, they're captured nations, has been to print money to give welfare checks to speculators on Wall Street or the City of London or Bay Street here in Canada. But there's no actual idea permitted of the nation playing a role for the good of the people who really represent the nation, right?
Right.
That's not permitted. Which is why it's very interesting to contrast the type of NATO summits where, like, Russia has been declared enemy number one, China has been declared enemy number two. Any chance of a diplomatic resolution has been completely struck off the table by the different idiots who came out trotting the same line that they refurbed again and again, saying that, we want a diplomatic solution for Ukraine, but only a diplomatic solution that involves Ukraine getting everything it wants and Russia being defeated. And it's like, unless we get that, there will be no diplomatic solution. But we want a diplomatic solution. And it's like, you compare the G7 insanity around the Green New Deal, which is, again, another perversion of the utilization of a nation state serving not the interests of the people, but rather the interest of a technocratic oligarchy. And then you compare that to the more reasonable approaches to thinking in terms of the BRICS that have also unveiled. I mean, we're seeing a hyperdrive of development around the BRICS Plus community right now that is increasingly seeing Iran being streamlined to become a full member, likely sooner than later, especially also of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, You have Saudi Arabia, basket case Saudi Arabia is actually being brought online, both for the BRICS to be a partner state within the BRICS, but also within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization potentially. That would be an incredible leap. But so many others. You have Eurasian Economic Union deals with Indonesia, the fourth most populated country in the world, that's being solidified right now between Putin and the head of Indonesia. Like there's so many points of sanity and development amongst that part of the world where they're doing free trade, but they're doing it based upon a concept of an intention to develop. So your free trade works if you don't have, you know, a dishonest, massive centralized deep state power trying to destroy or control the game board. If you actually have an honest intention to develop all, you know, parties within a free trade agreement, then it works great. So that's very different from the globalized type of system we see coming out of the West. But that's all been happening right now. So it's been a very active week and a very positive week in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. Out of the G7, they came up with the proposals of $200 billion, and at the same time, criticizing China for their efforts in the continued development of the BRICS nations. And there's been recent conversation that the Saudis, Matthew, very well could be in line to be also joining the BRICS, which would be a huge game changer, especially in the form of energy.
Yeah, well, that would be that would overturn the entire petrodollar. I mean, if Saudi Arabia were to actually get on board, because they are disposable, and I think, you know, they've benefited financially and in terms of certain power structures by playing the role assigned to them back in the 1930s when the British installed the House of Saud into a dominant position. I mean, it's only 80 years old, right? People think of a kingdom as being hundreds of years old, and it's like, no, these were people who were, you know, they were tools of the empire back in the 1920s as one of many warlord families, and they happened to be favored, installed in power. The nation was given the name of their family, Saudi Arabia, but it's only 80 years old. I mean, it's a few generations, not even. And ultimately, maybe at certain points, some of the royal families thought that they could get a partner seat in the New World Order, but it became very clear, especially in recent years, that the use of oil geopolitics was a means to an end. It had no durable role to play within the considerations of the rules-based international orderistas, who have their entire, you know, utopian or dystopian view of a one world government, a transhumanist religion, and a highly depopulated system with maybe, you know, 500 million, maybe 1 billion people permitted to exist in a state of stupor. That oil doesn't play much of a role in that configuration. And so I think increasingly the intelligentsia, if you want to call it that, the elites within Saudi Arabia, within other Gulf states, have increasingly woken up to realize how disposable they actually are. And
agree.
It's a high trophy. I mean, for China and Russia, they've been playing it. I mean, I think we've all been frustrated, I think, by seeing Russia and China tolerate the injustice and the attacks on Yemen, which has been waging a 7-year noble fight of resistance against Saudi Arabia for the right to their own sovereignty, right? And it's been tough. It's been really tough. A lot of, I think, 500 million people have, is it that many? It's a lot of people have died. And the West has been playing along, and everyone's trying to, like, you know, woo Saudi Arabia to their corner, because it is still a very strategic zone. But I think it's again a high trophy, and the fact that China and Russia seem to have won quite a few battles in winning over Saudi Arabia to the Eurasian cause is very important. And yeah, the petrodollar, I mean, the entire basis upon which the entire, you know, post 1945 world order has been based is the US dollar. And since 1973, it's been the petrodollar. That would completely go up in smoke. It's already the case that nations around the world are de-dollarizing fast. And China kept the US alive a little bit because China has been hoping that the US would regain their senses. They don't want, a lot of people say, oh, China wants the liberal world order of the West to be destroyed so that they can become the hegemon. That's what, you know, people like Tucker Carlson are saying. And I mean, so many, it's a common narrative. But it's like, right. No, the reason why we haven't collapsed yet, and we have not had hell on earth on the streets of America and Canada at this point, is because China has gone above and beyond to keep buying US dollars, $3 trillion of US Treasury notes, of US useless debt, waste paper. They've been buying it, holding it, and buying more. They could have sold if they really wanted to cripple and destroy their enemies of the West, so-called. They could have sold at any time, but they didn't. They really wanted the US to regain their sanity so that they would have a partner of the United States to work with and cooperate with. They don't want the US ultimately to collapse. That's an important point to get across. They would rather a reliable partner. But now it's happening. Now there is a de-dollarization. They're setting up the foundation for a new system, and it's got a foundation to it that's viable.
But Matthew, we have to dominate, okay? Right. But don't you understand? It's all about the Thylicides trap. The falling power has to be in conflict with the rising power, and it's all about the sword of Damocles and the 13 tasks of Hercules. This is the insanity of our leadership, man. It's like we just can't simply work on we cannot work on a mutually beneficial trade agreement. The reason for that is this: at its core is because of central banking. Yeah. At its core, the multipolar world sees money as a utility, a public utility, whereas in the West, it has nothing of the sort whatsoever. And this is the core problem. This is why, I always beat my head, and I was wondering, why is it such a problem for Western governments to work with the multipolar East? This is exactly what it is. It's the very concept of money in the West is so skewed by these modern day Babylonian bankers, man.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say something. I'm doing a little screen share here, but since it was July 4th yesterday, and I don't want to.
That is frozen.
Oh, is it frozen? Can you see me at all?
I'm good here.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it me? Am I frozen or Matt's frozen?
I think you're frozen, V. We're here. Hey, Matthew, you're
or CJ, are you frozen? Or am I frozen? Or is Matt frozen?
Yeah, private chat. It's V.
Hello?
You froze.
It's V. Okay.
V.
Yes.
There you go. If you want to bring that screen share back up, Matthew, you can walk through that over the holiday weekend.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay.
All right. So just because it was July 4th, what's going on here?
I don't know.
Do you guys not see this?
Yeah, I think your internet is dying out, Matt. It's like keeps cutting off, keeps going down lower.
Oh, CJ, can you hear me well, or is it bad?
I'm good. I think it might be on V.
Maybe it is me.
Yeah, because I'm hearing everything you're saying fine.
Oh, okay, it's on my end then. Matthew, continue by all means. I think my internet's screwy.
All right, okay. So I really wanted to just read something quickly because it was July 4th yesterday. And hold on, let me just pull this thing up. Sure. Okay. Uh-oh.
Did you have dual monitors? I think you
All right. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Picture
perfect.
of Yat-sen? Okay. So the crisis of the United States right now is not a new thing. It's not like the US has not almost destroyed itself under its own folly and ignorance and arrogance and British manipulation in the past. This has happened before. Now, in the past, what has luckily been the case is that there has been, when a crisis of an existential magnitude has struck, you've often had situations where a great leader has been able to arise to take advantage of the crisis in a positive way, or at least there would be an empowerment of the nationalist forces within America that could organize in accordance with the fire to put it out. And you had people like, Abraham Lincoln, you had Franklin Roosevelt, you had John F. Kennedy. Today, we don't really seem to have too much of that in active positions of power. That's a big crisis. But the point of understanding our history is very important because all of these individuals who died while in office, and again, I've said this many times, it's the source of a key feature in volume 1 of my Clash of the Two Americas book series, is that the common denominator of the 8 American presidents who died while in office, which is a huge number, and that's not even including Bobby Kennedy or Martin Luther King, who both had presidential material, or Alexander Hamilton, who died in 1804. I mean, there's a variety of many other people assassinated that I'm leaving out. But of the 8 official presidents, the common theme is that there was the formation of their identities tied to a deep immersion into lessons of history and culture. They all had it. That's what gave them the power to transform and develop themselves, and their sense of self being, self-worth, in accordance with certain discoverable principles of universal history that they saw themselves heirs to and responsible to protect, even at the cost of their mortal lives. So that's an important thing that so many of us have been deprived of. We're all passionate about it, but the education system that we were given, unfortunately, didn't service those needs as it was designed to do. That's the only way a republic works, as Ben Franklin made a point, is by the constant renewal of the principles of that society into every future generation. And the role of education, as well as of the media, play a very important role of creating an informed, wise, citizenry that would be capable of discussing the highest lofty ideas of policy that they could then hold their government to account for its own transgressions or lies or things that disobey either promises made at the ballot, at election time, or from the very constitutional principles themselves. So when you don't have a population which has access to those basic forms of intellectual development, you get increasingly a mob. You don't have a citizenry, you have subjects. You have people who essentially expect things to happen for them, or they become easily a mob that can be governed by demagogues who could speak well but have no substance. So one of the points in terms of US-China relations that I just published this day is the American spirit behind China's new Silk Road. I got this, I put this together. It's a very short piece going through the development of the transcontinental railway. Mm-hmm. Really one of the most formative, biggest mega projects that shaped the character of the United States for a very long time. The first time a nation was connected from coast to coast across one continent. That was Lincoln's Transcontinental Railway, begun during the Civil War. But it took 25 years of organizing for that transcontinental railway to be built. Before 1863, there was a lot of work to sabotage it. It only became a discussion in the early 1840s. And one of the key figures, who was the father in many ways of the Transcontinental Railway, is this fellow, William Gilpin. And that's him right there. Gilpin himself is kind of known as the prophet of manifest destiny. And his version of manifest destiny was very different from the racists and imperialists who wanted to use the concept of the right of America to spread itself around the world in a new Roman Empire ideology and subdue the savages under the yoke of a new sort of American version of the British Empire. His approach and Lincoln's approach was very different. And he saw the point of the development of rail from the east to the west to the Pacific, not as a way to, like, let's say, subdue China or control the natives, but rather, as he says here in 1852, I just want to get this across, because again, this is the guy, he did more for the good of the United States in the 19th century than people realize, but also internationally. But he says, at a point when the US is corrupt as hell, it's suffering from over 18 years. It suffered from 2 American presidents dying while in office. One president had just died the year before, Zachary Taylor. 12 years earlier, you had Harrison, who had also died under mysterious circumstances, who was about to revive the National Bank of the United States, a Hamiltonian bank, right before he died after 3 months in office. Both of them were Whig presidents. And you had the traitors, the Anglo-American deep state, the British imperial fifth columns that had taken control of the presidency. At this time, it was Franklin Pierce, I believe, who was a Masonic young America leader who would become president of the United States. And people like Albert Pike, who was a puppet of Mazzini, a leading Freemasonic controller of anarchist movements in Europe. He was a leading figure within the Franklin Pierce government. So was Jefferson Davis, the guy who later soon tried to become the president of the Confederate States of America. He was also a leading figure. Many others were within the Pierce government. So things were going bad. And in that period, William Gilpin, he writes saying, salvation must come to America from China. And this consists in the introduction of the Chinese Constitution. The political life of the United States is through European influences in a state of complete demoralization. And the Chinese Constitution alone contains elements of regeneration. For this reason, a railroad to the Pacific is of such vast importance, since by its means the Chinese trade will be conducted straight across the North American continent. This trade must bring in its train the Chinese civilization. All that is usually alleged against China is mere calumny. That's it's a bit, a calumny, everyone knows what that is, spread purposefully, just like those calumnies which are circulated in Europe about the United States. This is a very elevated mode of thinking, because he'd also been saying this. He recognized that the chance for the United States, the only chance to survive its own decay, would be to rejuvenate itself around the most ancient civilization, having the youngest civilization of the US, right, and the world's oldest, unite in a common bond of brotherhood and development. This was at a moment when you had also in the United States in 1853, he organized with a network of other co-thinkers who were based deeply within China. A lot of American missionaries had also brought in Chinese patriots to study in the United States. In 1853, they commissioned in the Washington Monument this plaque here, which features Zhu Zhiyu's 1849 work, A Short Account of the Oceans Around Us. It's a Chinese geopolitical analysis book, where it celebrates the United States as being the most advanced civilization that could inspire China to reform and adopt and modernize. And within this book, Zhu Zhiyu says that of all famous Westerners of ancient and modern times, can Washington be placed in any position but first? And so this was the Chinese delegation commissioning to set up this plaque, which currently sits at the base of the Washington Monument, 1853. I mean, this is just incredible. Now, all of the people who were originally working with Gilpin to advance this, to create the first conferences to promote the transcontinental railway, these were all people who thought this way. You could read their writings. You could read the writings of Charles Sumner, William Seward. They were all working around the idea that we have to create something new that had never existed before, as far as a society of win-win cooperation. And again, this is I think the best way for me to celebrate Independence Day is to really think about what is the essential character of what made America great, what makes America such a threat to the system of oligarchism, because it's that remembrance of that process that nearly that's what almost destroyed the empire back in 1776 to 1783. Ben Franklin was studying Confucius. He was studying the Chinese meritocracy. He fought very hard to try to get the Chinese meritocratic system adopted in the creation of the new U.S. civil service. He had published Confucius's writings, Mencius's writings in the American colonies starting from 1738. He began publishing that. He said that he modeled, Ben Franklin, the father of founding fathers, made a point that he modeled his life off of Socrates, Jesus, and Confucius. And so this is already there from the very get-go. It came about back in the Second American Revolution in the Civil War period. And when you look at what Gilpin was doing, like Gilpin not only became one of the key figures who was the lead bodyguard of Abraham Lincoln. Once Abraham Lincoln won in the elections in Illinois, he had to survive several assassination attempts, and there was an elite bodyguard managed by this fellow named Cassius Clay. Muhammad Ali was later on named after Cassius Clay, but Cassius Clay was a leading abolitionist. Later on, Lincoln made him the U.S. ambassador to Russia, which was a key point in getting Russia to intervene to save the USA from the British-financed Confederate forces that tried to break up the young nation, right? But Gilpin was one of the 13 key bodyguards of Lincoln that helped Lincoln survive the assassination attempts that were put against him in just getting him into Washington alive. And then afterwards, he did such a job and won Lincoln's trust to such a degree that Lincoln made him the first governor of the Colorado Territory on the western frontier. And it was to that extent that Gilpin, as governor of Colorado Territory, was able to organize a greenback system. He printed, before Lincoln even began printing national greenbacks starting in 1862. Gilpin had done it a few weeks earlier because he couldn't get the money needed to fund the militias, the soldiers that were there in Colorado that were trying to stop the Confederates who were trying to open a western frontier. So there was a war directly from the south to the north. There was a war also from the north to the south. So from the standpoint of Canada and British operations in Canada, running raids, running terrorist operations, there were dozens of these against Lincoln from the north. Britain was very happy to provide the Confederate Secret Services all of the land that they needed from Montreal or Toronto. But there was also the danger of a western frontier opening or a western front. And the attempt that was made to open up that front was put down by Gilpin, and he was only able to put it down by printing greenbacks, which is what Lincoln told him to do when he was in Washington, still working as his bodyguard. He said, if you can't get the money, print it yourself using state-backed treasury notes, and we will honor that later. But that worked. That paid for the weapons. It paid for the soldiers. It put down what's called the Battle of Glorieta Pass, was the most bloody battle up until that point in the Western Zone, and it was such success that the Confederacy never made another attempt to try to open up that Western Front. But had they been successful, it's doubtful that Lincoln at that point in 1862 could have survived. So Gilpin is a guy who he wore many hats, again, as the leading spirit of the transcontinental railway, the guy who saved America during the Civil War. And then he was a guy who spent the last 35 years of his life organizing like hell to build this. This is the, I mean, I think everybody watching Rogue News has seen this, who've watched our show, but this is the Gilpin map, Gilpin's economic, just, and correct map of the world, featuring rail developments all over the world that are tied across the Bering Strait, this 100-mile gap between Russia and Alaska. It was, Alaska was Russian territory up until 1867, but it was Cassius Clay, it was Ambassador Stokel, it was William Seward, Charles Sumner, other leading Lincoln patriots who had organized the sale of Alaska to America, always with the idea that rail and telegraph lines were going to be developed not just to California, but all the way up through British Columbia into Alaska and into Eurasia, with networks, as you could see, throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, throughout China, throughout India, and throughout Africa, as well as down through the Panama Canal and all across Latin America and Ibero-America. And in this book, I mean, Gilpin is very clear that it's through Hamiltonian banking, the idea of using what he calls 520 bonds, which was a take on what Lincoln had done also with his bonds that were purchased by the people of the United States to fund the development and pay for the war, but also pay for the industrialization of the South that was sabotaged after Lincoln died. So that was what Gilpin was saying to the world would be needed to fund such a development. And he's clear when you see Gilpin's remarks. He says in his 1890 book, which people can still get online, ignore some of the racist language. He was not living in the woke world, okay? But overall, there's a very high, deep morality and strategic thinking that Gilpin has access to that scares oligarchs then and it does now. And he says, Gilpin, that they will continue to expand their work to the Bering Strait. And now he's talking about the rail lines, where all the continents are united. This will extend itself along the Oriental Russian coasts into China. To prolong this unbroken line of cosmopolitan railways along the latitudinal plateau of Asia to Moscow and to London will not have long delay. The whole area and all the populations of the globe will thus be united and fused by land travel and railway. And again, he's writing this in 1890. And he's organizing again with networks that are building the Trans-Siberian Railway with the help of American engineers, American industrialists from Philadelphia, producing the rail cars and all of the equipment that's building the Trans-Siberian that's only beginning to be built in 1890. That's all happening with one international network. You have other co-thinkers working with this network in Japan with the Meiji Restoration, fighting. Will the Meiji government be pro-British? Will they adopt a samurai imperial paradigm, or will they adopt a real win-win cooperation development paradigm? Which will it be? And there was a big fight over which direction Japan was going to go. Unfortunately, we know what direction they were ultimately pulled in. However, there was a big fight over going in a more healthy direction. China as well. There was a push for massive reform. that could have really changed the direction in a positive way earlier, which ultimately didn't work. But nonetheless, throughout this process, all the way up until 1890, you had things like the Seward-Burlingham Treaty. So William Seward, the guy who organized the sale of Alaska, who was pushing to annex Canada after Britain had so openly funded the South, and was found guilty at one of the first international courts. The first international court case ever was featuring the Britain being found guilty for funding the Confederate cause and providing warships to help the Confederate South break free, and they were found guilty, and they had to pay a lot of money. But William Seward wanted, instead of them paying money, he said, just give us Canada. And that, at the time, I'm not for that today, but at the time, with America having a very different character than the USA of the post-JFK years, that would have been a fine thing. It would have been a lawful thing. But Seward also organized the Seward-Burlingham Treaty, which was an important treaty that basically got rid of the idea of an Anglo-American special relationship and instead made America's primary partner in the world China. And it gave China special economic zones of cooperation with the United States. It gave them free access to U.S. education, and it gave a reciprocal access of U.S. citizens to work and to learn in China. There was a huge influx of Chinese students who began studying all across universities in the United States, including one special student by the name of Sun Yat-sen. You guys know Sun Yat-sen, right?
Sun Yat-sen was an absolute terrible communist. He what else? He was working with Paul Robeson in order to overthrow America, and that communist revolution totally didn't happen. That's what we know of Sun Yat-sen. Actually, nobody knows about Sun Yat-sen.
No, that's the whole entire
thing. They just label you, and this is the problem with Western thinking. It's so damn binary. It's either 1 or 0, black or white, up or down, red or blue, that the nuances, which is in every form of geopolitics, it's very, the nuances are basically birthed within the complexities of human interaction that takes place on a national scale, is lost. You cannot understand the world if you have a binary thinking. If you have a binary thinking, it's input output. You're missing everything. Why don't you break down for us, Maddie, who Sun Yat-sen is?
You got it, man. I mean, this is a guy who was studying in the United States, in Hawaii, because of the Seward-Burlingham Treaty. He was brought in. He adopted Christianity, but he didn't only adopt Christianity. He remained a Confucius Christian. He studied the policies of Lincoln. He studied geopolitics. He studied the American System School of Alexander Hamilton, national banking, what protectionism is. And he had this burning fire inside of him to liberate China from the feudal system that had caused such decadence that Britain was able to enter and just destroy China in the century of humiliation, right? The Opium Wars, other things. That was only made possible because you had a decadence in the elites and a lack of development of the masses of China culturally. It was kind of like a similar sort of problem you had with the French Revolution, which was very different from the case of the US, right? Where the French, their elites became stupid and decadent. They had access to culture, but they didn't have the moral development to do anything with it. And they were just living in their palaces and mansions, and thus they had no love for the people. Whereas the people who had a lot of heart, they didn't have the culture. They didn't have the development or education or literacy in France, whereas they did in the United States. And because of that lacking, they were easily turned into a mob that converted a potential Republican movement of France into a Jacobin bloodbath terror that killed everybody, good and bad alike. If you were a scientist or if you were a good or a bad person of the elite, it didn't matter. You would lose your head. So, the problem of China was somewhat similar. There was a lack of balance of development, and Sun Yat-sen really wanted to correct that. He studied medicine, and he brought his lessons that he learned of studying Lincoln's policies back to China, so that when the revolution did succeed in 1911, he was nominated to be the first president of China. And when he was in the United States, he learned of this when he was organizing and he was like raising money in the USA. He was in Denver, Colorado, which was again William Gilpin's backyard. That was his like headquarters. And he then basically got on a plane and went to China to become the first president. But he constituted the first China, the Republic of China of 1911, around the three principles of the people of a nation that he learned of as being viable only if it's founded on principles being made of the people, by the people, and for the people. Which is, he wrote a series of lectures. He gave a series of lectures. He wrote a book on this. And so the whole idea was that China was going to emulate the best aspects of the American experience as exemplified by the policies of Lincoln. He writes about this in depth. And then he goes further in another book on the international development of China, which people can get on archive.org. And he outlines all of the different infrastructure projects and science projects to build ports, railroads, industries, all over China with the help of other nations, Russia, the USA, other European partners as allies of India. And in his book, this is a modern representation of the maps that Sun Yat-sen had commissioned with a lot of work. In 1920, he was no longer president, but he was still a force. And these are a few of the many rail lines that he had outlined for northern and southern development of the interior, so that it would no longer just be a nation based upon like exports of cheap stuff from coasts, but rather the development of all of the nation's interior. But as you could see, these rail lines also go into Afghanistan, into the Middle East, into India, into the Caucasus, into Russia, and ultimately all the way into Europe. This is essentially the new Silk Road. Okay, this is the revival of the Silk Road idea of 2,000 years ago that had been revived under the Tang dynasty of the 8th century. That was attempted to be revived again in the 15th century under the Zheng He, the great navigator who tried a maritime Silk Road, but it had been sabotaged sometime in the 1430s. We don't know the full story. And he was the first to try to revive this again under an idea of an international system of win-win cooperation, large-scale infrastructure. He advocates protectionism. And again, what's important about Sun Yat-sen, not only is he a Confucian Christian and a follower of Lincoln, but he's also loved on both mainland and in Taiwan. Two nations. Taiwan is a part of China, but Taiwan has been used, as everyone knows, it's a colony of the U.S. military-industrial complex, and it has been used to create sort of like a Ukraine of the Pacific as part of a way to instigate a conflict with China. Now, the reality is Taiwan was settled after the communists were victorious against Chiang Kai-shek, who was sort of the guy who took over the Kuomintang, the leading political party ran by Sun Yat-sen. Chiang Kai-shek was not qualified for the job. The guy was a much lower level thinker, much more inclined to corruption and backstabbing. And when he failed to stay in control of China mainland, he basically went off with his troops and made a new, colony, a new area on an island of Taiwan. And that became a US ally throughout the entire Cold War. And to this very day, there's a big problem, right? But despite that, both Taiwan and mainland China love Sun Yat-sen as a great hero, and both claim him as their own. And the thing about Sun Yat-sen is you cannot categorize him as being a communist or a liberal capitalist. He's not any of those things. Neither was Lincoln. He's a principled nationalist, but he's a universal human being who thinks on that universal level.
Right.
So that's the real key thing right now. And he says it in his International Development of China. And again, they have parades celebrating Sun Yat-sen in China. He says that the world has been greatly benefited by the development of America as an industrial and a commercial nation. So a developed China with her 400 millions of population will be another new world in the economic sense. The nations which will take part in this development will reap immense advantages. Furthermore, international cooperation of this kind cannot but help to strengthen the brotherhood of man. And Gilpin made that same point earlier on, 30 years earlier, when he said the ancient Asiatic colossus in 1890 in a certain sense, needed only to be awakened to a new life. And European culture finds a basis there on which it can build future reforms. Getting across that it's not just America's salvation that rests upon intercourse with Chinese civilization, which involves trade, cultural, science exchanges, but also Europe, which is far too corrupt and encrusted by oligarchical customs of these old families that go back to Babylon, which are centered in London today as they were back in Gilpin's time, as they were at the time of the American Revolution. And what they want today is what they've wanted then, which is a global system of feudalism. They, just like today, they wanted back then a Malthusian religion devoted around population control. This is not a new thing. It's new that they have the additional twist of a technocratic sort of, transhumanist flavor to it. But it's ultimately the same religion of depopulation, of anti-humanism today as it is then. And the solution today is the same thing. And China, Russia, India, other countries, Iran, understand this. And when you look at the proceedings, don't just read Western accounts of what happened at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summits or the Caspian summit that just happened a few days ago. But look at the actual transcripts, right? Go to the Russian website, go to the Chinese government website, go to the Indian websites, go to these various countries, nations, governments, websites, and read the transcripts of their leaders who spoke. Look at the policies that they're doing. And what you find is that this is the nightmare that is keeping oligarchs up at night, because they are in complete opposition to the Green New Deal. They're in opposition to creating false scarcity. They're in opposition to depopulation. And instead, they're invoking, as Sergei Glaziev has made the point just this week. I published his speech on the Canadian Patriot website. People could read the whole beautiful speech. Glaziev is a key figure, an advisor to Putin, and a leading figure around macroeconomic development of the Eurasian Economic Union. He's a genius. This guy's a brilliant figure and a strategist. And he's been very clear that we're fighting for the salvation of humankind as a species. And he's very clear of the terms of this current war that goes far beyond anything you see in Ukraine. So that's it. I mean, it's the same battle. It's the same principles, slight difference in context, but it's the same thing.
And this is why it's so important that people sign up to your website and follow you, especially the symposiums that you and your wife Cynthia host through your Telegram channels. It's so vital, folks, because it's important. Like, in the live chat, I was talking with Revolutionary Bliss, our very frequent listener, and she had the question about the Uyghurs and the Uyghur persecution, which is a played-up, nonsense, made-up Western psyop. There is no Uyghur persecution, and we all know the reason why the West is focusing on Xinjiang is because Xinjiang is rich in hydrocarbons and is a very key choke point to the One Belt, One Road initiative. So Adrian Zanz, who's the guy who was commissioned by Western intelligence agencies to literally come up with and make up an entire story about persecuted Uyghur Muslims, that's the guy behind it. Because this is what most people don't realize, and I'll explain this for you all to hear one last time. There is no Uyghur concentration camps. There's no Uyghurs being killed by the millions in China. That is bullshit. Okay? They want you to think that right now the number one singer in China is a Uyghur woman. A Uyghur Muslim woman is the number one pop singer in China. The Uyghur language is written on the Chinese currency. Uyghur students have an easier time to get into college than native ethnic Han Chinese students. The Uyghurs were never put on a one-child policy. One-child policy only affected the native Han Chinese. When China started to manage and govern Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, their life expectancy was about 45 to 50 years old. It is now 73. They had 800 mosques in the region of Xinjiang. They today have over 23,000. Okay? And then on top, I mean, think about it. Their language is on the currency. The most popular singer in China is a Uyghur person. Their kids have special halal kitchens in the universities that they have access to. All this done, and they're slaughtering the Uyghurs by the millions. It is bullshit. It is
Here,
another lie, by the way. Go ahead, buddy.
Few stats. And by the way, Brian Berlatek has a YouTube channel called New Atlas. He does some of the best work
he does awesome.
Yeah, you guys should have him on if you guys
we
can
need
get
we need to get Brian on. He's amazing.
Yeah, him and Daniel Dunbrill, both of those guys have two awesome YouTube channels that just take each of the claims being made as slanders against China and just destroy them beautifully. Vanessa Beeley's done some good work too. Yep. But just to get across, the GDP in the Xinjiang autonomous region has seen a per capita GDP increase of 100-fold between 1978 and 2020. So 100-fold per capita GDP increase. You already got across the longevity has almost doubled in like 40 years. In 1949, there was a 20% school enrollment of children. That is now 99.9% today. Access, the utilization of indigenous languages is not diminished. It has increased. Yep. There is no diminishing of the utilization of their languages or loss of the customs, while at the same time, they have access to high-speed rail development, better jobs, and within the re-education camps, because there are re-education camps, but the reason for that is that we have MI6 and the CIA, since the 1970s, have been funding radical madrasas using Wahhabite versions of Islam with the help of the Saudis, which have now been increasingly cut off, thank God. As far as the Saudi participation in a lot of this, it's been reduced. But this has been radicalizing Muslims all over that entire Central Asian, Southwest Asian zone, specifically originally to start, to basically bleed the Soviet Union. But all of Al-Qaeda, all of those problems that we have, all came out of that U.S. CIA-funded policy, which China shares a 70-kilometer border with Afghanistan. It has suffered hundreds of terrorist attacks since 2011.
Over 300.
Yep.
Over 300. Yep.
A lot of people have died. There have been explosions, open knife fights. People have been, there's so many. And so they had to deal with it in a way which involved, how do you de-radicalize people who are zombified and want to get into heaven to, get their 72 virgins and stop living their life of poverty? When you have CIA inputs coming in, how do you de-radicalize people? How do you give them something better? And that takes a lot of work if you don't want to bomb their country to the Stone Age, which is what the US policy was. China didn't do that. They instead had to create, for the most radicalized groups, they had to create re-education centers. Now, does that mean it's a concentration camp a la Hitler? Not at all. Nobody's being killed in these things. They're learning trades. You could actually see people on the ground interviewing people who have been through the trade schools where they're learning civics, Mandarin, but they're also learning, again, steel making, all sorts of different useful skills, carpentry, and they're getting job opportunities that have these are better paying per capita than you realize. Much, compared to the prison labor, cheap labor system that we have where American prisoners are getting paid 25 cents an hour to work for the military industrial complex. There is nothing nearly that bad. In China, they're given housing, they're given all sorts of amenities, and they're given, again, crazy good job opportunities when they get out. On top of that, you have mosques, 24,000 mosques in Xinjiang, more than most any other country in the world as far as Muslim countries.
And that's from 800 mosques to 24,000.
Yeah, that's insanely good. That is quite good.
But wait a minute, if they're trying to genocide them and wipe them out, why would they increase their per capita GDP? Why would they increase their life expectancy? Why would they never instill a one-child policy on them? Why would they, give them more access to education and give them trade? Why would they do that?
No, and if you look at where is it coming from? This is the worst type of genocide. This is the most failed genocide in the world because the population's like 2.5 times more today than they were 30 years ago. Exactly. So that's the worst type of genocide. If they're trying that, they're failing badly. But number two, it's like, where is the information that we're being given that's being taken up by both, the left media, the right media? Tucker Carlson spews the same CIA funneled garbage as much as CNN does. It's the same talking points as much as Bannon does and Epoch Times does, which is, again, a CIA front promoted or protected and maintained by Falun Gong, which is a Scientology cult with its alien interstellar communicating messiah figurehead living in Philadelphia in a compound protected for the past 25 years by the CIA. who's been running a foreign government in exile to overthrow the Chinese government and running an international network of media outlets, Epoch Times just being one of many, and cultural outlets. They're all using material that comes from things like the World Uyghur Congress. What is that? It's a German-based organization with some affiliates in Turkey, which have increasingly been derooted, receiving most of its money from the National Endowment for Democracy. Openly on their website, they even admit that that NED, a CIA front, openly has been providing them their money. And they make things up. They use anecdotal evidence to the wazoo, and they use just narrative framing of images out of context to try to paint an image that induces fear out of their viewers.
And the gullible West believes it.
No. And if you go to people who actually live there and talk to them, which nobody does, you get a very different set of testimonies. And this includes also people living in Tibet. Similar story. Everything we just said about Xinjiang applies to also Tibet. That's a whole other thing. But it's a lot of propaganda we've been given. It's
absolutely
all fake. Revolutionary Bliss, I hope that kind of addresses some of your concerns. But again, go to Brian Burlatek's New Atlas YouTube channel. Watch a lot of those videos. He does a remarkably good job. And Daniel Dunbrill, also great job. If you can get, if I could try to get their emails for you, V, or
yeah, if you could
reach out.
Absolutely, especially at the end of this month, we'll be getting our YouTube channel back, so it'll be great to have them.
Cool.
Fantastic.
All right.
We are at the end of the show, folks. Hope this has been eventful. Again, don't believe all the bullshit and BS out there. We have a large fight ahead, and it's important because when this country's economy collapses, and I'm talking about us, you need to have the right framework in order to wake people up so we can help rebuild this nation. And again, folks, it's Matthew Ehret. You can follow him over at CanadianPatriot.org as well as the RisingTideFoundation.net. Subscribe to his Substack. Join his Telegram group. Be actively involved in these awesome symposiums between him and his wife, Cynthia. It is truly remarkable and more than well worth your time. Thank you all for listening in. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.